Michelle Nesky, the Posh PA, and today I'm going to talk about how to obtain letters of recommendation for PA school, a key component to your application that can really make or break your admissions. So let's get to it. But first, if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button, y'all. I'm here every week dropping videos to help you on your journey to PA school and beyond. Okay, so let's talk about letters of recommendation. You want to identify 3 to 5 individuals who you believe will write you a strong and compelling letter of recommendation that can speak to your character and your skills. Okay, so typically, schools will require 3 letters of recommendation. The application itself lets you submit up to 5. Okay, first things first, you want to check your program requirements. Some programs actually require a letter of recommendation from a PA or require an academic letter of recommendation. So please make sure you're checking your program requirements before you ask the people that you're going to ask to write a letter. Okay, so that's number 1 and really, really important. You want to make sure that when you do ask your letters of recommendation, you can provide them some background and some history about why you want to be a PA, what you've done up to this point, so that they can really speak to your skills and to your character and your responsibilities and your integrity and your professionalism. Okay, and one great way to do that is to provide them with a copy of your resume and your personal statement. Hopefully, these people know you pretty well. You've been working with them in some capacity, and they're going to know this story in advance, but it's always good to provide that information for them so that they can really get a whole sense of your application and you as a person to write you a strong letter of recommendation. Now, some will say that 3 letters of recommendation, 1 should come from an academic reference, 1 from a clinician, and the other a character reference. That's a great rule of thumb, but you may be in a different situation and have other people that you want to ask, and that's okay too. I do recommend an academic letter of recommendation if you have a good relationship with a professor, because it can speak to your study skills, your work ethic, and your ability to handle coursework as well as prioritize your academics. And that can really be helpful for a PA admissions committee who might be worried about your ability to handle the rigorous coursework, particularly if you're somebody that has a lower GPA. Okay, so always a good idea to have an academic reference. If you don't have a good relationship with a professor, then it's okay to ask somebody else for a letter of recommendation, okay? I would say you definitely want somebody that you work with in your patient care experience. You want them to be able to speak to how you interact with patients, how you are part of the team, how you act in a professional environment, how they feel you will impact the PA profession and what you will bring to the table for patient care. Okay, so I would always ask somebody that you have a relationship with. Hopefully, that's a physician, a PA, an NP, anybody in your clinical setting that can really speak to that and highlight your strengths for an admissions committee. Always a good idea. Other good people to ask are if you were on a sports team, maybe your coach, if you worked for a volunteer organization and you were part of that for a long time, they can speak to your community service and your ability to give back. You could also ask somebody that you did research with or that you were part of a teaching environment in a teaching environment with that can really show how you can interact with students of different levels. I think that's really important as well. So there's so many options when thinking about who to ask for a letter of recommendation for you. And I will tell you that my rule of thumb is quality over quantity, okay? You can't have 5 letters, but if you have 5 ho-hum letters, that's not as good as that you have 3 really amazing ones, okay? So I would really try to hone in on people that you know are going to write you a good letter, provide them with background information, your resume, your personal statement, really amplify what they'd be able to add into a letter of recommendation for you that could really push the admissions committee over the edge to say, hey, we should bring her in for an interview. All of these people spoke really highly of her, her character, and her skills. So something really important to think about. Having a letter of recommendation from a PA, it's not mandatory. For some programs it might be, but it is really helpful for your PA school application. So if you can get one, definitely get your hands on one, okay? Now, how do you ask somebody for a letter of recommendation? Well, there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think the easiest way is in person, okay? It's much more personable, especially if you're working with that person, to say, hey, I've been working towards going to PA school and we've been working together for a long time. I'd be honored if you'd consider writing me a letter of recommendation, and see what they say. Now, if you are no longer in distance of the person and it has to be done virtually via email, then I would be sure to draft a professionally written email asking for a letter of recommendation and follow up if you haven't heard back in a couple of days. Now, you want to make sure once somebody says yes to writing a letter of recommendation that you have open communication from the time that you ask to the time that your application opens, because what you don't want to happen is for you to be sitting and waiting for somebody to submit their letter of recommendation so you can submit your application to CASPA, okay? That is really difficult. So what I always recommend people do, the application cycle opens every April. At the end of April, when the new cycle opens, first day of May, you send out your letter of recommendation requests to the people that you asked. You send them an email. Hopefully you've been in communication with them between now and then, right? And you say, hey, you should have gotten an email from the PA application service. Please let me know if you didn't receive it. Please upload your letter for me by May 15th. And I'm really, really honored that you're writing this for me. Give them a deadline, okay? You want to make sure you're giving people a deadline to get that letter in, all right? Now, between the time that you ask the person and the time that the application opens, if that's a long period of time, make sure that you're dropping them an email or a text or checking in with them between the time you asked and between when the application starts. So if you ask them in January and the application opens the end of April, you should have had touch points with them between that time. So an email to say, hey, or connect with them in some way if you haven't seen them or you're not working with them. Just a reminder, applications open in 2 months. I'll be sending you this letter. Super thankful you're doing this for me. Make sure you have those touch points, okay? If you're not with that person or continuing to work with that person, because it will remind them that they are doing this for you, and it will really help them to stay on timeline ultimately for you and for you to get your application in when you want it in, whether that's May or June. So everybody's on a little bit of a different timeline, but you don't want to be waiting for a letter of recommendation to submit. So overall, make sure you're asking them in person or if via email professionally, if you can. Have touch points in between the time you ask them and the time the application opens. Be sure to remind and follow up with them when the application opens that they should have gotten the link. I would follow up with them in 5 days, okay? You want to make sure you're having that follow-up as well, just to make sure that they're staying on timeline. I know you may feel annoying or irritated, but this is a big deal for you, okay? And they agreed to write you the letter. I would always have a backup option, okay? What if something happens and one of your letters of recommendation can't do it for you? So I would always recommend having one additional person as a backup option if somebody is not able to write you a letter. You don't want to end up with a situation where you're rushing around trying to find someone last minute. So in the beginning, when you identify these 3 to 5 people, maybe say, I want these 3 people to write my letters, but I have these 2 as well, just in case if something is to happen. You don't have to ask them at that time. You just want to make sure that those are people that you're considering asking if in case something happens, okay? So really important to have solid, strong letters of recommendation. Sometimes people will ask me, what should those letters include? They should include and speak to not only your character, but your skills, your work ethic, your professionalism, your ability to work as part of a team, your academics, really whatever that person is working with you for, to highlight your strengths that will make you a good PA in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video and you got a lot out of it. Be back next week.